Hello, guys, and welcome back to Mom Talk. We are here with Becca. She is a physical therapist. She's dual certification in physical therapy and also athletic trainer. And she is located in Spooner and Mary Sports in Rockwall. So we're really happy to have her here today. We are going to talk all things sports, recovery, and a lot of things that we think parents need to know about training and sports and all of that. So we are very excited to have her here today, and we are just going to dive on in and get started.
Perfect.
Yeah, so we're going to start with what are the guidelines for training for a specific sport for youth athletes?
Yeah, so I think the biggest takeaway for parents that I would like parents to know is just kind of what are the basics based on their age, and then also some more like sport specific things. So I think the big takeaway is that kids are not pro athletes, right? They're very different, and therefore they should be treated very different. And their training should really focus on their long term athletic development as opposed to one isolated sport. And being able to bring that in as a parent and help layer that into your kid, especially if they're really passionate about a specific sport, just helping them understand that long-term athletic development is really important. So from a basic standpoint, kids should get about 60 minutes of exercise every single day. And then when we think about sport specifically, I think a general rule would be that if you have a kid that is 12 years old, they should be only training that number of hours in their specific sport. So 12 hours is good rule for 12-year-olds. 10-year-olds 10 hours, so they shouldn't really be training more than that. It's like a really good general recommendation that the American Academy of Pediatrics really kind of sticks with, and there's been some good data to support that if they're training more than that, there could be some effects that we don't really want to go
10
down.
hours a week or
10 hours a week specific to a sport.
Okay.
So if they're just like generally playing and running and jumping and playing basketball one day and volleyball another day, and overall that includes more than their age, then that's okay. But for a specific sport, it should stay to no more than their age.
So like if they're doing strength and agility on a Wednesday for their practice, that does not count towards the 10 hours, right?
As long as it's global and focused on athletic development, yes. Okay. But if they're doing like the same sprint drills because they are a sprinter, then that would kind of count towards that, if that makes sense. So just kind of a general rule that I think is really easy to follow. But yeah, say you have a soccer player where they're doing privates and soccer training, then they have their team practice and they have a tournament, right? That's probably going to add up to a lot of hours. So we really want to be mindful of that. Maybe on a week where you have a tournament and that you know you're going to be having 4 or 5 games in that weekend, that would not be a time to have a private added into that training load because it's all specifically for that sport.
I'm definitely forwarding this to my soccer coach.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's from the American Academy of Pediatrics. So they have like that general rule, and I think it's just a good recommendation to follow. We'll kind of get into that a little bit more later, but I think it's easy for parents to follow and kind of have a general rule of thumb. And then the other thing too is when we think about sports specificity, they should be taking about 2 to 3 months off in a year period from their sport. So if you've got a baseball player that's playing year round, there should be about a 2 to 3 month gap where they're maybe not playing that specific sport. Still have them be active, work on their athletic development and all other things. But again, those are just some general rules. 12 months of the same sport every year full time is a lot for a little kid, and it's going to really cause some other things down the road, and we want to try to promote their long-term athletic development. So those are some of the kind of basics from a training specificity, but then the other piece is strengthening and cross-training, specifically resistance training. 2 to 3 days a week is supported by, again, the American Academy of Pediatrics for athletes to be doing some resistance training too. So if that's not part of their routine, maybe trying to get them involved with other things that are away from their skill for their sport that are just focusing on athletic development.
In that 2 months that they need to take a break, is that from little kids all the way to high school? Everybody should be doing college. Everybody should be doing that 2 months.
Yeah, this is kind of generalized to that 6 to 17-year-old group. Okay. And it's crazy to think about, 6 and 7-year-olds who are specializing in sports, but we're seeing that more and more and more. So yeah, that's kind of where the line is really drawn from these general recommendations is ages 6 to 17.
In talking about these one sports, like what happens to these kids when they specialize in this one sport too early?
Yeah, it's definitely becoming more of a thing as we are trying to chase kind of that athletic achievement. But kids are very young, their bodies are very impressionable, and specifically when it comes to growth plates, if they experience the same load and the same stress on growth plates that are not closed, it can cause a lot of damage, and it can lead to some further injuries. That's why stress fractures and tendonitis and things like that are really, really common if they're constantly experiencing the same loads over and over again. So that's why we have these recommendations for sport specificity. That's why we have recommendations for things like pitch count, things like that, is because, and you're starting to see a lot in the literature about jump count and like volleyball players and stuff like that, because it's the same thing, right? If they're experiencing the same force over and over and over again at too high of a demand, it can cause a lot of problems specifically to their growth plates and their tendons. As they attach to the growth plate, their tendons can start to be really irritated. So those are some of the injuries that can be common. So those are the ones that I really look out for.
So with that, we're going to kind of backtrack a little bit. So why do youth athletes need to train and prepare their bodies differently than adults?
Yeah, so same kind of language I used before, right? They're not adults, and so they're still developing physiologically and neurologically too, right? They are not processing information the same. They're not processing physical stress, emotional stress the same. So they need to train very differently to make sure that we can adapt for that. And then the other thing is that they can't tolerate loads as quickly. So maybe you can go on a training plan where you go for a marathon training and you can do that in, say, a 16-week plan. That is not an appropriate load tolerance for a kid to experience. And so they just need to train differently. And we need to think of their bodies as being treated differently. The other thing too is that we want to really focus on movement quality instead of like task achievement or goal achievement, like winning a championship, right? Maybe that's not as important as like, can he just squat with good mechanics, right? Movement quality. I can't tell you, I know as a physical therapist, I treat a lot of youth athletes. I can't tell you how many times, and I'm surprised that a child just cannot squat. So we really need to be focusing on like their training and preparing their bodies looks very different because they just need the movement basics, and that's going to create a much better foundation for them. And that will in turn, and I want parents to make sure they know this too, is that will in turn lead to skill development. If they cannot get these essential movement patterns down, that will actually limit their ability to play their sport better.
I feel like we see that pretty early here. Like,
Yeah.
Through like crawling, walking, pulling up, like making sure that we meet those developmental milestones at a very, very young age to set up for this sort of situation. Right. When they're in youth sports, 6 to 17, you said,
mm-hmm.
You know, we see that at the very beginning of all of this too.
And it has a lot to do with their family environment too, right? Like if they have siblings who maybe move differently or parents who move differently or not at all, right? Like that is also causing impression on their kids as well. So it has a bigger impact than I think what we realize.
Right. Starts early. Starts really early.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What role does strength training play in injury prevention for our young athletes?
Yeah. I mean, this could be a whole talk in itself. I'm very, very passionate about this. I think this is one of like the biggest things to debunk with parents is that strengthening is appropriate for kids at appropriate loads and appropriate progressions with supervision. I think that's really the biggest key too. And I see this a lot when we get to those high schooler kids who are in the weight room for the first time with very little supervision or very little instruction, but yet they are throwing big loads on. And then they come in and they're like, hi, I have a lot of back pain because we heavy front squat. I'm like, have you ever done that before? So things like that. I think that's the big key is that we need to have a progressive load. We need to have appropriate mechanics and forms. And that's why that movement quality is so important to layer in before they get to the point where they can start loading. So it's a huge thing to really make sure that we are giving them the basics and the foundation to be able to play their sport better. I think the thought is, well, if we strength train, it's going to hold them back from developing in their sport. And what the research shows is really the opposite. It shows that not just patients, athletes, I just use patients all the time, but athletes will do better when they are exposed to these loads and demands that are outside of their body with appropriate form, with appropriate mechanics and that progressive load. And that will actually in turn help them so much more with their sport.
So is that something you do at your office? Is like, can people, kids, athletes come to your facility and learn the basics before they go into the weight room. Is that something you offer?
For sure. Yeah. Really where I think physical therapy as a whole should move, but really kind of where I'm passionate is staying in that preventative and performance zone. So common, we think of physical therapy as like we go to a physical therapy when I can't play anymore, or I'm out because of this, or I'm pulled out because of this, right? But we really should be utilizing physical therapy on that preventative and performance side. So definitely, I think that if you're noticing, even just as a parent, like, hey, my kid is moving a little different than some of his teammates, not from like a comparison aspect, but just from like, wow, their speed isn't developing, their jumping skills aren't developing, their squatting skills aren't developing like some of their classmates or their siblings or stuff like that. Like, that is a time to intervene early to help give them those tools to be successful, because what we know is that strengthening is the best tool we have for injury prevention. It's been proven time and time again in all sorts of conditions all over the body for different ages, different athletes. So it's such a powerful tool we have to prevent injury down the line and improve their performance. If you want your kid to be a better athlete, they need to probably be stronger and have better movement quality. And I want to emphasize that too, because it's not just about building muscle mass. It's being able to manage their load and their body and the forces that they would experience in their sport.
And I know I'm seeing this everywhere, all these fancy tools of recovery, like the ice bath. What are some of your recommendations for these kids? Do you recommend ice baths, or what do you recommend?
Yeah, I think that you could go down a rabbit hole and you could spend a lot of time and money. I actually know this stat because I just talked to a bunch of high school basketball players. But do you guys know how much money LeBron James on recovery and recovery related services a year?
Probably fun.
No clue.
1.5 million.
Whoa.
1.5 million is what it says. And that includes nutrition, and that includes massage, and cold chambers and stuff like that, right? Like, he has a ton of different resources, an endless amount of resources, probably, where obviously the average parent is not. So I would say the biggest takeaway would be to stick to the basics, right? Sleep, good nutrition, hydration, and recovery is what is going to be the best for your athlete. When we talk about, say, that kid that's training for, he's got a private and he's got team practice and then he's got a tournament this weekend. Okay, well, that after that tournament, we need to take a day of rest, and rest doesn't always mean nothing, right? Active recovery is really good. Now, what is active recovery? Go for a walk. Let them just go play at the park. Like, that is active recovery, and that will help them recover a lot better so that they're fresher for the next day, the next practice, whatever that is. I think we get into the mindset of just like, the harder and the more I push, the better I'm going to be. And these kids are not the same as adults. And even that is a drastic saying for an adult, right? That's not the same either, right? But kids need way more rest and recovery. And I think sleep is a really undervalued thing for everyone. But remember, these kids are still neurologically developing as well. They need really, really good sleep. They need 9+ hours, sometimes up to 12 hours, depending on what age group we're talking about. So they need really good sleep. So I would say for parents, like, stick to the basics. I used to have a physical therapy professor that used to say, that experts do the basics really well, right? Think of your pro athlete. They're not just getting more time on the court, right? They're not just training harder, lifting heavier, right? They're doing all these things that are proven in the science and in the literature to actually help with recovery, which will in turn help your performance for the next day. So parents, get a really good bedtime routine. If your kid is a screen user, like, really try to limit that, especially near bedtimes. Focus on good nutrition. I would say put more of your money on good nutrition as opposed to all these gadgets, and none of them are harmful by no means, right? The boots and ice baths and all that stuff, it's not bad. There's a little literature to support that it can help with recovery, but if we are not doing this part, that stuff's not really going to help, right? Like, if they're sleeping very poorly, both from a quality and quantity standpoint, they're not getting nutritious meals, it doesn't matter what you do in a cold tub, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like with chiropractic, right? All these athletes are training like they're pros, right? I mean, 4 or 5 days a week. You're talking about one-on-one training, strength and conditioning, all of this, but then they're really not treating their body like they should, and having their spinal line keeps their body going, getting them out of fight or flight. So really taking care of their body. Chiropractic is so important too for these athletes.
For sure. And that to me would be like, that's your recovery day, right? Like, I come see you guys and I have my recovery day to help reset and get ready for the next day of training. So like that would be a great tool. And the same thing like for you guys to be able to see these athletes to really just do that big neurological reset, get them back to baseline, like so valuable, and would be way more worth their time and efforts and money to be able to do things that are going to really help their system tolerate load again. And that's really what we're trying to balance. And again, they just are a little bit more, we need to be a little bit more protective of how they are balancing load. So, yeah.
A lot of teams skip warm up, right? Or do basic jogging warm ups or something like that. What are structured warm ups that they can do instead?
Yeah. I like to say that a good warm up is a coach's cheapest insurance policy for his team, right? Like if you are taking care of your athletes, like it is by giving them an appropriate warm up. We are prepping, priming not only the muscles, joints, and tendons to withstand the forces that they're going to experience in their sport, but it's neurologically priming them, right? If you ever feel like your team is just like going through the motions, jogging a lap around the field, and then you're like, why are you guys not ready to play their first 5 minutes? Well, let's take a look at the warm up. What did we do to get them not only physically, but mentally prepared for their sport? I think that it's such an underrated tool, and there's some really cool literature out there to support some of the evidence-based warm-ups that we have. I think that there is hopefully more coming down the pipeline, but one of the biggest ones that's been studied is in soccer. So FIFA 11, probably like 13 years ago, I think it was 2011, 2012 era, FIFA 11 came out with a program called the 11 Plus program, and it's a evidence-based warm-up that it has a lot of really cool features. It's available to everyone. You just search FIFA 11, it comes out in a PDF. You can print it out as a coach or a parent, have your kid do it. It's been proven in the literature to reduce, there's multiple studies that have tracked it over time, but 30 to 50% of injuries in season.
Wow, that's
so
crazy.
when think a third of your athletes, it could prevent a third to half of the injuries that your team is experiencing because of what it's doing to prep and prime the system. So it's such an underrated tool. If you want to limit your injuries on your team or in your own child, making sure you guys are doing that. I always use this example, like no shame to parents. I know life is busy, but like when you're late to practice, your kid should not be running out there and jumping on the field, right? You need to take that intentional 5 to 10 minutes, even if you're late, because I cannot tell you the amount of times I've treated ACLs, ankle sprains, and that has been the status of like, man, we were running late, I didn't get to warm up, and I just jumped right in. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. So I have a huge emphasis on this. I want to make sure that people have resources, and that's specifically for field-based sports, right? I think you could apply and extract some of the data from FIFA 11 to field-based sports like lacrosse. But if you are a court sport or more of a upper extremity sport like a swimmer, just contact me. I will be more than happy to put together an evidence-based program. Again, I want to live in prevention and performance, so I'd be happy to kind of help with that.
I think you kind of hit on it before, talking about prevention. What is it when there's myths that weight training causes the growth plates?
Yes.
Injury to the growth plates?
Yes.
Hit on that.
Yeah, I think it's along the same lines of like, what can we do from an injury prevention standpoint? Strength training is such a challenging concept for coaches and parents and athletes to think about why it's important. But it has been proven time and time again for a litany of different injuries that strength training is the most specific thing that we can do to prevent injuries in any ages. So any type of resistance training is appropriate for kids. Again, referencing some of the NSCA, so that's the National Strength and Conditioning Association, and the Academy of Pediatrics, right? There are so much literature out there that shows that it is not harmful, and that's a big myth that I think is very harmful for people to believe, that strength training is bad or it stunts your growth, and that's kind of the language you'll hear, and they've just debunked that tons of times. But what I think is the bigger thing to know is that if your kid is old enough to follow directions, they're old enough to strength train. Because if we go back to that comment I made earlier, like if they are under supervision and doing progressive loads, their body can withstand that. Now, does that mean that they're 1 rep maxing? Absolutely not. And that should really not be happening until post-puberty. But resistance training and being able to focus on high movement quality, squatting, lunging, things like that, to make sure that they have good movement patterns under some load, think about your kid who's a basketball player who's jumping under the net with force, right? With pressure. They need to be able to have good sound landing mechanics. So strengthening and being able to provide some forces outside of their own body weight is really, really crucial to make sure we prevent injuries. Again, I think this could be like a whole nother topic that I could talk about for hours and hours, but it's a huge injury prevention piece, and I think it's missing in a lot of training programs. And so I think it's something for parents to take a look at if we're thinking about how to get your child to be a better athlete, and a more well-rounded athlete. I would emphasize, as opposed to not just better at their sport, is strength training.
Cool. You mentioned age. Like, is there a specific age, or is it just when they can follow instructions?
Well, there's literature out there that says as young as 6 or 7. There's some that says 9. I think in that age group of like 6 to 9, they're still pretty young. I think it's less about like loading up under heavy load and focus on movement quality, and that can still be like considered your cross training, resistance training type of thing. So I think that age group, we just have to make sure that they have good supervision and your focus is on their athletic development and not so much on their skill, sport specific skill development. And by athletic development, I mean being able to like run with good mechanics, jump and land on 2 feet, 1 feet under stress, like under all different types of conditions. That's what athletic development really is. So I think that that 6 to 9 group, according to the Academy of Pediatrics and the American Academy of Pediatrics and NSCA, there's a ton of literature to support that it's safe and has no harm for any of these things like growth plate injuries and stuff like that, like we talked about. And it will actually make them stronger. It'll make their tendons and their ligaments more able to withstand greater forces. Obviously, we know that there's muscle growth and muscle strength that comes with gaining muscle and any type of resistance training. So I think there's just a lot of good that is misunderstood, and there's not been any harmful research as long as it is supervised, it is progressive, and it is focusing on movement quality. I think that's the biggest plug. I don't want anyone to run out there and be like, my kid needs to be in, heavy weightlifting or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. But even when it comes to heavy weightlifting, if it's done appropriately and it's loaded, it is proven to be safe. When we think about like what is the heavy loads what is like the appropriate load, typically around body weight movement to light, low resistance for that 6 to 9 group. And then in that like 9 to 13, 14 prepubescent group, that's when you can start to tolerate a little bit of load, but you want to keep the reps high and the weight low. And then once you get into post-puberty, then you can start to actually load a little bit more, as long as you're still focusing on those basics. But the goal is that if we can keep good movement quality, they're appropriate to load heavier. And that's the people that you can start saying like, okay, now I can see you moving towards like max lifts or close to max lifts, but that shouldn't be happening in that younger age group. And it definitely shouldn't be happening if they do not have good movement quality. So I emphasize that part.
I feel like I hear that a lot. People going and doing it, like, are they watching you? They're like, well, no.
Yeah.
And it's...
Yeah, right. No shade to the high schools and the middle schools, right? They only have so many coaches and stuff. But yes, it is a problem, right? They're playing, say, like we have these football players that are freshmen coming in and they're playing against, older kids. They need to be strong, right? Those are forces. So we need them to have some tolerance to more force. So we don't want to cut that out, but how can we try to have some middle ground? And that may be someone who's coming for some services, whether it's with me or working with a coach independently, or maybe they can prep and prepare their body to have better movement quality so that when they get into the need for higher loads, competing against, bigger athletes, stronger athletes, they have the tolerance for it.
Yeah. So besides strength with resistance training and things like that, how does it also help with athletic development, their confidence and their performance, and all of these young athletes that we're all seeing, honestly?
Yeah, I think this is such a big thing too. I think that strength builds confidence, and more confident athletes creates a safer athlete. I think that especially when I talk about young female athletes, this is such like a taboo conversation. I feel like it's like so thought of still to not be a need for female athletes. Like they are still withstanding large forces, and so we need to make sure that we are exposing them to strength training, because it'll help improve their confidence. It'll help improve their confidence not only in their sport, but their ability, and that intrinsic belief will help carry them a long way to develop into not only a better athlete, just a better human too. I mean, there's so many studies that have shown that when adults were exposed to any type of strength training or resistance training, team sports, things like that, how many skills and qualities it builds, including confidence, and carries throughout their life. So I think it's not just about that, like being able to play the next game. It's being able for athletes to be really well-rounded. And if we could always just kind of emphasize that with our parents and the athletes and coaches as well, I think that's such a big thing.
Well, I want to also touch, like, athletes is like not just traditional like softball, soccer, baseball, volleyball, like dance, cheerleading, gymnastics, all of that stuff too. Those are athletes. It may not be traditional, right? But we're talking about them too.
For sure. Yeah.
And runners. So
runners.
What can long runners, like what can parents, what can coaches help prepare these kids that are long runners?
Yeah, same conversation, different context, right? We think about, I was just talking about like the forces of playing football. What we think about with endurance athletes is the repetitive ground reaction forces that they are experiencing when we have kids that are running these long distances, and they need to be able to have the strength and endurance to meet that demand of their sport. Same conversation, right? I think strength training, when we think about performance sports, especially where weight tends to be an issue, or weight tends to be a conversation, maybe is a better way to put it, like your endurance athlete, your long distance runner, your dancer, right? We have this thought process that, well, we don't want them to gain muscle mass. There was just, actually, I wish I had the stats fresh in my brain, but there's just a research article that came out specifically in runners. Now, this is for adults, but I think it can apply to your youth athletes, and probably even more so, that the fear is that it's going to slow them down, so their pace down if they gain too much muscle mass, or it's going to change their stride, things like that. And they actually proved that not only do those athletes who were on a 2-day a week, we're not talking about a lot, a 2-day a week, have better times for their distance that they're running. And forgive me, I can't remember the statistics, but they also showed, it was called a burnout time. So they ran the distance that they were supposed to complete, and then once they reached that distance, they ran as hard as they could for as long as they could. The patients that were on the strength program 2 days a week, and it was super basic, it was calf raises, it was knee extension, and leg press, like just the major lower body muscle groups, 2 days a week, and it was less than 70% of their max rep. When they did that, they increased 38% their distance that they could sprint for after they completed their distance, compared to the group that did not strength train. So I think it's such a common misconception, and that's really looking at like your last kick, like your final kicks. We think about like a high schooler competing in that 3-mile race, like that last kick, strength training can tremendously help with that. So I can't remember the distance that the study was running, and like I said, it applied to adults, but I think the same thing when we talk about our youth athletes that are running long distance races. We have this fear that we don't want them to gain mass, and then that slows them down or changes their stride. We think about performance athletes, same thing, right? But we're showing, and the research is consistently showing, that is actually helping their athletic performance.
Awesome.
Went off on a little tangent. I'm
No,
real passionate.
I'm
real passionate about that one. Yeah.
I need to get my son to you ASAP. I know all y'all are probably going to get her info now, because we're all overdoing it with our athletes. We all want them to be the best athletes. So
for sure,
all this information is so helpful. I mean, we do love sending to you. We think you're a great PT and an athletic trainer.
I appreciate
it. But how can they contact you?
Yeah, so you can reach out to me. Our website is spoonerpt.com. Like I said, we're right here in Rockwall over at the Amerisports Complex, but anybody's welcome to email me at b.sutton, SUTTON, @spoonerpt.com.
And you can email us directly, and we'll get the information to you too.
Yep. Yeah. If you had to give parents one piece of advice.
Man, I prepared a little summary, and I want to make sure I do it justice. Here's my take. As a healthcare provider, as an athlete myself, I want to make sure that I'm giving you not only a good answer that understands like you want the best for your kids, and you need direction sometimes to know like what is the best for your kids. Here's my advice for you. I want you to build your athletes and your kids up for the long game, not just the next game. We want to build them up to be really well-rounded people and really well-rounded athletes. The goal isn't to make your 12-year-old a professional next week, right? I think it's about that long-term gain. You want to see your kid happy and healthy playing when they're a senior. You want to see them happy and healthy when they're 25, when they're 40, and having a really long life that is centered around health and wellness. And I think some of the things that you can do now to really help balance their training, emphasize recovery, doing things that are age appropriate for them as a child is going to help carry that a long way. And so we understand as healthcare professionals, like we're here to help support you to make sure that you can give your athlete the best tools, but the best tools doesn't mean training harder, it's training smarter. And that's going to help your athletes so much more to become a well-rounded long-term athlete as opposed to just winning that next game, winning that next championship.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
We'll see you guys again next month. Bye.